tend to look at nutrients in food as the holy grail of healing the body or of achieving a healthy lifestyle. There are a lot of people who are inside for 8 hours a day, sitting in biomechanically unfavorable chairs with orthopedically flawed shoes, stuffing their faces with, God bless their hearts, it's good food, kale, sprinkled almonds, and bacon-infused beef jerky and raw camel's milk and colostrum powder mixed into bone broth. And at the same time, they're sitting inside, poor posture. So what I'm getting at is that in this movement, the movement of improving the health of our culture through ancestral means, we have to take into account more than just food.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 57, and my guest is Ben Greenfield. Ben is an expert on how to improve your health and get the most out of your body. He is a triathlete, health coach, and speaker. He is also the author of Beyond Training, Mastering Endurance, Health, and Life. And that's pretty much what we're going to get into today. We discuss with Ben variables which are often overlooked when it comes to our health. I'm talking about things besides food and exercise. By the end of the show, you'll have a handful of practical tips that you will easily apply to your daily routine and that will give you a happier and healthier new year. Before we begin, we want to recognize our sponsors. The Nutritional Therapy Association, real education for people who believe in real food. Go to nutritionaltherapy.com. And Real Milk, nature's perfect food. Go to realmilk.com. Now on to the interview with Ben, which we recorded at the Wise Traditions Conference in Montgomery, Alabama last November. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Ben.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Hilda.
I'm so glad we're here. We're in Montgomery, Alabama.
It is so freaking beautiful outside. I actually wish we were outside recording right now because it's like the sun is shining and like the riverfront here in front of the Renaissance Hotel, which is where this is at. It's amazing. It's beautiful. There's people walking around in the sunshine. I slipped my shoes off about 45 minutes ago to go out before the podcast, get some ionic energy from the earth, and I have my little. I was showing this to you before we started recording. I've got my little instrument here that I just got delivered to my hotel room. See, I'm a big fan of the concept that there are certain things that can increase, for example, levels of your brain-derived neurotrophic factor or neuroplasticity, neuronal cell growth, and also tone of your parasympathetic nervous system, like your vagus nerve, which snakes through your whole body and is essential for the health of a lot of your organs. You can tone it in certain ways, and you can also increase that brain stimulation in certain ways. And music, oddly enough, sound frequencies and music is one of the most proven ways to do this. And so I try to play some form of music every day, and I usually travel with my ukulele.
That's
but
awesome.
I'm going to Finland after this, so I couldn't take my ukulele. I didn't have enough room. But I've got this thing. You can't really. It's hard to play while I'm holding a microphone. But basically, it's called an ocarina. See if I can get any sound out of it for you here. There we go. It just arrived to my hotel room off of Amazon. So I was outside walking barefoot and playing the ocarina and looking like some stupid elf man from a Renaissance festival. But yeah, it's beautiful here.
I know exactly what you're talking about because I play the guitar, and so I have to memorize like a lot of chords and finger positions. And totally. I've heard that this is really good for the brain, but then I know you're right. The music does something for my spirit.
Exactly. Yeah. There's the musical component for your spirit, and you could get totally. I mean, we could take a deep dive into this, and I know we probably don't have time to like delve into all the nitty gritty of music, but there is this concept. And there's actually a really good book about this called. I forget the name of the book, but it's written by a guy named Michael Tyrrell, Tyrrell, And the entire book is about how specific organs in your body respond to certain frequencies, which I know sounds woo-woo, but for example, every cell vibrates at a certain frequency. Everything, every atom vibrates at a certain frequency. And when you look at sound frequencies, there are certain frequencies, like 444 hertz associated with the same frequency of vibration of the heart. And so we find that like certain music, certain sounds, certain frequencies can help to open up your, if we were to look at like Ayurvedic medicine, your heart chakra, or there are certain sounds and frequencies that affect the liver. And there are even practitioners who will do things like sound therapy and sound healing and tuning forks and crystal bowls. Sedona in Arizona is a very popular place to go for this type of therapy. But I don't think that even though it is invisible, we can deny the importance of frequencies and sounds and vibrations on the human body. And yeah, music is just a perfect example of how, if you're listening in, you can feel that. You can't deny that there's something more than it just going into your ears and you, shouting out to Miley Cyrus in your car.
And didn't some famous poet say music soothes the savage breast? So there's an understanding that goes back centuries about what music does for us. And that's what I love actually about the Weston A. Price Foundation. They're about food, farming, and the healing arts because they know there's more to it than just the food we eat.
Yeah, it is more than food. It is more than organically raised camels wandering around California producing raw milk. It does delve a lot more deeply than that when you look at, how did you say it, food, farming, and
the healing arts.
And the healing arts. Yeah, the healing arts definitely go far above and beyond just food and farming. And that's actually, you and I were talking earlier before we started recording, there is this prevailing problem that I think a lot of people might be unaware of, or that they don't really dwell enough upon, that we tend to look at nutrients in food as the holy grail of healing the body or of achieving a healthy lifestyle. When you go to a conference like this, there are a lot of people who are inside for 8 hours a day, sitting in biomechanically unfavorable chairs with orthopedically flawed shoes, stuffing their faces with, God bless their hearts, it's good food, kale, sprinkled almonds, and, bacon-infused beef jerky and raw camel's milk and colostrum powder mixed into bone broth. And, all those things are great, don't get me wrong, much better than a Big Mac, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they're sitting inside, poor posture, probably, I shouldn't say probably. I talked to a lot of people, and many of them didn't do any movement this morning. I was just asking, how'd your morning go? What's your morning routine? They're like, I just, had my cup of coffee, and of course, I have to be careful who I say had a cup of coffee, because I just found out that coffee is not super kosher in the Weston A. Price diet. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
I did not. But there were people who said, "Don't tell people we're having coffee this morning." Anyways, though, so what I'm getting at is that in this movement, the movement of improving the health of our culture through ancestral means, we have to take into account more than just food.
Well, that's exactly what I want to talk with you about today, because I think everybody in the slow food movement and the food revolution, if you will, is understanding how important nutrient dense, real food is. But there is more to our health. There are more pieces to the puzzle. And I want to talk to you about those invisible variables today. Let's start with just posture. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned over the years?
Sure. For example, let's just start with a very stark example, right? I am not sitting in a chair right now as we are recording. Neither am I standing. I'm squatting, and I'm kind of squatting on my heels, and kind of, if you'll watch me, I know this isn't a video podcast, but I'll describe to those of you listening in, kind of shifting to my toes right now. The same as some, it's the dump in the woods posture, right? It's how you would defecate if you didn't have a toilet. But it's also a very good posture if you look at a lot of like ancient tribes or modern, hunter-gatherer tribes. They'll be gathered around the fire in that deep squat position that, frankly, many people cannot maintain for any longer than 30 seconds because of tight hip flexors, or because of, another very, very common one is very, very tight big toe flexors, because of what's called a lordotic curve in the lower spine that keeps you from getting into a comfortable squat position, or what's called a kyphotic curve in the upper spine that we get from the tight chest and the hunched over shoulders and neck that occurs when we're at a computer or hunched over a cell phone or on an airplane or in a car. And a lot of people are oblivious to the fact that we're not just talking about poor posture, say, giving you low back pain, right? Mm-hmm. We often say, I don't have any low back pain. I can sit in a chair just fine. And when I do get low back pain, I'll get a standing desk. But when you look at posture, there is a lot of correlative data between, for example, nice, tall, proud posture and formation of things like testosterone and growth hormone, opening of blood vessels for lymph fluid and vascular flow to certain areas of the body that can tend to become hypoxic or restricted from oxygen and nutrient delivery due to almost like a kinked up, hunched over body. Katie Bowman is a biomechanist who has some really good books on this, like Move Your DNA is a really good example, where she talks about, how it does go beyond just like, say, compressing your vertebra when you're sitting, or getting tight hip flexors when you're sitting. You can even look at blood vessels and see almost like a kinking effect that restricts vascular flow that can cause things like heart issues. And this stuff is not rocket science to address. It's not rocket science to fix. It's more of a matter of awareness, and also, frankly, eliminating the propensity for us to want to fit into social norms. You walk into a room full, like if we went downstairs right now to have lunch, 99% of the people sitting down there having lunch at the at our healthy conference, they're going to be sitting in these chairs with poor posture when they could be squatting, kneeling, lunging, standing, walking. There are all sorts of ways of moving, but when you walk into a room full of chairs and there are 5 people sitting, well, that 6th person is going to sit, and then all of a sudden 100 people are sitting, and the same for the conferences and the talks downstairs. Mm-hmm. There are some people, those 5 to 10% who are cognizant, who are in the back stretching their hip flexors, and maybe they're sitting for some of the talk, and then they're standing for some of the talk, and they're kneeling and they're lunging. But that change of mindset when it comes to considering that there are other positions you can be in aside from sitting in a chair, that's important. And then if you want to go one step further, you can do certain little movements sprinkled throughout your day. And I'm a huge fan of this. I do this all the time, that stretch your fascia, that reverse a lot of the damage that can occur from us having to face reality. I sat in an airplane for 7 hours yesterday to get here. And I wasn't, I was frankly sandwiched in between 2 obese, stinky guys. It was not a fun flight. But when I got into the airport, it would have been where did I fly in from Montgomery? What's the other? It would have been Atlanta. Yeah, Atlanta. So I was in Atlanta, and I got into an inverted position. I put my feet up against the wall, and I used a form of, there's a lot of different ways it's stretched, but I used a form of stretching called ELDOA, ELDOA, which I learned and which you can easily find on YouTube, but it's a way to stretch out the fascia to reverse a lot of these effects of poor posture. One other quick example is, like I mentioned, I was just outside walking barefoot. And like I mentioned earlier, the big toe flexibility is one big issue with posture. A lot of people don't think about their toes, but just by walking around occasionally barefoot, it's crazy. If you do this for months or you make it a part of your lifestyle, a year from now, you're going to notice the shape of your foot actually changes. Your toes spread out and the bones get stronger and the arch becomes more springy. You can reverse a lot of the damage that modern posture can cause on your body. But yeah, that's a big one, posture.
Well, I'm so glad you're telling me all these things. Now, I was with the Maasai last May, and they used to have the tradition of squatting around the campfire. The elders would squat around, and you know what? Now they sit, Ben. And I think they sit because it seems more Western and more culturally appropriate. But I wish they were still squatting, because what you're saying is that's really valuable for our body position and strengthen the core, right?
Right, exactly. Coke and Campbell's soup are also part of Western culture, but that doesn't mean that they're going to do you any favors. Yeah.
I know. And actually, when I was there, I was talking to them about how valuable their traditions are, and many people were embracing that. But I want to go back to the squatting thing, because I am one person that has been working on that, but I do have tight hip flexors, so I can't do it for very long. How do you build up to the point where you are today?
First of all, just doing it. Second, that whole idea of sprinkling movement throughout the day is something that has really transformed me and my movement patterns, because I used to, for example, I did Ironman triathlon for almost a decade. And I was like, when I was in spandex, I looked good. Like I was that guy, like out, racing hard. But I was also, sitting for 6 or 7 hours a day. And a lot of people didn't know. Like every time I'd ride my bike, I'd have intense low back pain. And, every time I'd try to do just like a deadlift with my own body weight, I'd throw out my back. And, all of that was due to tight hip flexors. All I did, honestly, was I just started putting in lunging stretches throughout the day. Right, because that's all I knew. That's all I could think of. And since then, I've learned about a lot of other ways that you can do things like, foam roll on your hip flexors by, making love to a foam roller on the floor, stomach down. Mm-hmm. And, you can even take like a lacrosse ball and shove it into that tissue and kind of roll around on it with a grimace on your face. But it works. And you can do yoga. If you were to do a Google search for yoga hip openers, oh my gosh, there's like 10 different yoga moves, all targeting the hip flexors from different angles. But honestly, all I started doing was I told myself, okay, I'm going to quit sitting for longer than an hour without actually standing up at some point and doing about a 6-second stretch for each side of my hip flexors by just getting into a lunge position and reaching my arms overhead. 6 seconds being about how long it takes for what are called your Golgi tendon organs to relax, right? For those ligaments to kind of open up a little. And that's where I started. So that meant 8 times a day, I was doing a 6-second stretch for either side of my hip flexors. And then, once you start to sprinkle stuff like that in, or like every time that I go to use the bathroom on an airplane, I do 40 air squats in the bathroom with the rule that my butt has to touch the toilet seat. But then when I finish that, when I come out of the bathroom, I do the airplane version of the lunging stretch where you kind of pull your heel up to your butt. And I just hold that for about 30 seconds on each side. And so for me, it's habits, it's patterns. It's where you train your body to where like, okay, if I've been sitting for 55 minutes, it's lunchtime. If I've been on an airplane and I'm using the bathroom, it's squat and quadricep stretch time. And these things become just like eating breakfast or brushing your teeth, a habit.
But you do have to be willing to buck cultural norms, because when you were in the airport and that one stretch, I'm sure you were getting a few glances, right?
Yeah. And you know what? Think about it this way. I will be overjoyed if one person who saw me doing jumping jacks or this Eldoa stretching or anything like that in the airport scratches their head and maybe Googles what I was doing, or maybe the next time they're in the airport, they do 50 jumping jacks. That's how we affect change. Yes. We don't affect change with some huge global movement. I mean, that's wishful thinking. We affect change by teaching our children and working in our local community to help just a few people out by, I know that we're going down a total rabbit hole here, but I used to think that it would be cool for me to go to Africa and volunteer and start some movement, where I somehow figured out how to give a percentage of my business sales to support huge communities. And I realized that you got to start small. Now I feed 40 kids in the local community each week with one little plastic bag of little snacks that they get on the weekend, kids that would normally not get much food to eat at all. That's not, like, if you look at that, that's 40 kids, right? Like that's a drop in the bucket. But what if everybody did that?
Yes. Right.
And the same thing for your body. What if everybody who saw you doing these stretches and saw you doing jumping jacks or whatever, what if that just sparked a tiny, tiny revolution? And that is, I think, the way that you need to think about things, rather than being that person that's like, oh, it's just so freaking embarrassing. I just can't do this.
And the truth is, our listeners and a lot of people here at the conference are already embracing going against the grain because they're eating foods that are different. They're saying no thank you when someone invites them to fast food, or ordering a special meal at a restaurant. So we're used to doing that. So they might be hopefully willing to take a few of these steps you mentioned. We want to pause now and thank our sponsors. The Nutritional Therapy Association, they train and certify nutritional therapy practitioners, emphasizing whole, properly prepared, nutrient-dense food as a key to restoring balance and restoring the body's ability to heal. Based on the teachings of Weston A. Price. Learn more at nutritionaltherapy.com. And Real Milk. Real milk is pasture-fed, unprocessed, full-fat, nature's perfect food. Find out about the benefits of real raw milk and where you can obtain it at realmilk.com. Let's segue into one of the other invisible variables that affect our health, like light. You talked about being outside. What do we get from being outside?
Sure. A lot. A lot. Again, we could probably talk for hours. But the biggies, well, let's talk about two of the biggies, right? Sunlight. Because we know, for example, based on research, that if you are eating a healthy diet, like a lot of folks at this conference are doing, specifically a diet that's rich in chlorophyll, chlorella, greens, plant matter, that light, specifically UVA and UVB light, can activate, very similar to what happens in a plant with photosynthesis, the production of ATP in the absence of actual calorie matter. So you supply your body with energy when you combine clean eating with sunlight. You, of course, get the vitamin D production. We know that just 10 to 20 minutes of exposure between about 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. gives you, all the vitamin D you need without fermented cod liver oil, right? like you can actually go out in the sunlight and get that. Or, for example, we know that sunlight affects water. Dr. Gerald Pollack up at University of Washington has done some very interesting research on the effect of photonic rays, very similar to what we would get from sunlight, affecting the actual structure of water, meaning that it creates what's called an exclusion zone, a formation of positive ions kind of in the inner part of water or fluid or, say, blood, and negative ions towards the outside. And this allows for fluids to flow more readily. And this is admittedly theoretical because they haven't done actual studies on sunlight exposure and heart disease that I'm aware of, but there could be an enormous potential for reduction in cardiovascular disease. And there is, of course, an increase in blood flow. We know it produces nitric oxide. We know, your skin gets a little bit of blood flow to the surface. So yeah, from a cardiovascular standpoint, huge benefits. And then there's also the idea that you get exposure to negative ions. You not only get exposed to negative ions when you are exposed to sunlight, but also fresh air, wind rushing over the water like it is over the river outside, the trees and the gases that trees and plants and bushes produce, and even the magnetic field that the earth itself produces when you're standing on grass or on earth. And why that's important is because that computer, Hilda, that you're sitting in front of right now, that does produce some amount of positive ions.
Yes.
And so do appliances, and so does indoor lighting and electricity and Wi-Fi routers. And your cells operate at a specific electrochemical gradient. There's a whole book about this called The Body Electric by Robert Becker. And there's this idea that once you reach below a certain millivolt potential, you really support a normal, healthy metabolism of the cell, about negative 70 to negative 80 millivolts. But when you're just constantly exposed to positive ions, indoors, appliances, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc., with no sunlight and no grounding and no wind and no fresh air, you're getting a little bit of an imbalance in the ratio between negative ions and positive ions. And so that's just a few of the reasons to go outside. I suppose, there's also that biochemical effect. We know based on, this Japanese research and the Japanese concept of Shinrin-yoku, or what's called forest bathing, that there's a decrease in, for example, salivary and plasma cortisol. Not that cortisol is bad. I don't think any hormone is bad, but for someone who has chronically elevated cortisol, that's certainly another positive benefit.
You were describing the computer and the appliances and the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, and I thought, that's where most of us live. We are inside our homes, we get in our cars, we go to work, we're in a building with fluorescent lights, and recirculated air, you can't open the windows, and then you go home, repeat the same thing. So it's critical for our health. And I just think also you can tell by looking at people's skin that they look sickly when they don't get outside. Yeah. So that's telling us something, right?
Yep. Yeah, it tells you a lot, especially when you look at the slightly pale white skin of a lot of school children. It's horrible. And, I have to deal with this because, for example, I live in the forest out in Spokane, Washington, on the north side facing slope. So I actually, at like 2 p.m., like I lose all sunlight unless I actually hoof it up the hill to the farmland up above my house and get out in the sunlight. And during the winter, I have to bundle up and it's cold outside. And I go outside and I get up there in the sunlight just because even exposure of the sun on the hands and the face and, of course, the eyes, we know that you get vitamin D production. We also know that it decreases a lot of the things that I've had to deal with before I started doing that, which is seasonal affective disorder. I didn't even realize. And I tried the biohacks, the blue light producing glasses and the in-ear stuff. And, I've got the infrared sauna with the phototherapy built into it. That stuff works. It mitigates some of the issues, but freaking nothing beats just sunlight.
So yeah, sometimes we think we can improve on the natural, by imitating it, but nothing beats, like you said, the real deal.
Nothing beats and I am a biohacker. Don't get me wrong. Like just yesterday before I left, I was doing transcranial direct stimulation on my head for, preparing myself for my morning workout. And I do infrared, intranasal light therapy and, and I've got honestly, I have every biohack on the face of the planet, and I use them. But again, like nothing beats the feeling of walking outside, half naked and barefoot, sunlight, surrounded by a bunch of plants.
Well, and speaking of plants, it makes me think about air, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because I heard someone say one time that no matter how messy your city or smog-filled it may be, you're better off opening up your windows. That's better air outside than it is inside your house. What do you make of that, Ben?
I think unless you're in Hong Kong, you're probably right. Yes, the air outside, which we already touched on, is full of negative ions. And it tends to be slightly higher in oxygen, but you also see absence of things like mold and fungus and volatile organic compounds or VOCs, the phytoestrogens that we find in a lot of cleaning chemicals, and a lot of the other issues that are in the indoor air that we can't control, right? Like you and I can't control whatever they cleaned this carpet with last month, or whatever these walls were painted with, or this wood paneling on the table in front of us, what varnish they used on that. We can mitigate some of that damage, though. We can open the windows. I was quite downfallen this morning to discover that I could not open the windows in my hotel room. Apparently they don't want me jumping out, but that's usually what I'll do is I'll open the windows, I'll get lots of fresh air, and then you can, I shouldn't say fool, but you can hack your internal environment, right? NASA did a great study on a variety of plants that not only leach things like toxins and volatile organic compounds from the air, but that also produce very high amounts of oxygen. You could Google the NASA houseplant study and then go to freaking Amazon or your local garden facility and buy those plants and put them in your home. You can get HEPA air filters. You can get negative ion generators. I have in my house, I use one called, it's an Aller Air, and it's built into the ducts in my home. So it's cleaning the air in my home. And I have like a little air oxidizer on the bedstand right next to me and also in my office because I understand that I'm getting different air indoors than I am outside. So you can mitigate some of the damage. And I think that's definitely smart to do. But you also have to, in my opinion, get outside because that's the most natural way. Because here's the problem, and not to belabor the point too much, but once you get your negative ion generator and your HEPA air filter and all of your cool houseplants, you might be tempted to just hang out inside because, hey, you know what? It's okay now. So be careful, right? Like do that stuff, but be cognizant of the fact that you still need to get outdoors because it's just like you need to eat the whole natural raw ripe tomato instead of necessarily just buying the lycopene pill. Or you need to eat a pomegranate rather than buying the vitamin C plus 72 antioxidant formula that they're selling on Amazon. And it's this concept of synergy. And I think that once you go outside and you get air and sunlight and water and absence of modern electricity and all these little things that we talked about today, you get a big dose all at once of all those things. And as I'll readily admit that science has not proven that there is a big difference between negative ion generators and HEPA air filters and houseplants and going outside. I just know from my own body, my own feeling, and I suspect anybody listening in, or you, Hilda, if you've tried this, you just can't beat getting outside.
Oh, it's the truth. So we're going to wrap up now, Ben. If the listener could only do one thing of those things that you've recommended, what would you recommend that they do to improve their health?
Nothing of what I've just recommended, I'd say, because you already know all that stuff. The last thing I'd throw in there would be something that has been proven to increase nitric oxide production, blood flow, the strength of the immune system, that brain-derived neurotrophic factor and vagal nerve tone that I was talking about, weight loss, conversion of inactive metabolic tissue into metabolically active tissue, and that is 1 time a day, take a cold shower.
Oh, I did that already.
Every day I did. Now the shower in this hotel didn't get too chilly, but regardless, even if it's just slightly chillier than what you're usually used to, that's me every day. I do a cold shower or a cold plunge, or it's like my rule. Like every day I have to shiver just a little bit. It's so good for the body. So try that out.
5 minutes?
You don't have to go 5 minutes, but the guy who's done most of the research on this, Ray Cronise, who's a former NASA materials engineer who studies like the effect of cold on the human body, he swears by 5 minutes. I'll be honest, I'm probably closer to 2, but 5 minutes is a great goal to shoot for.
Well, that's excellent. Ben, it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Well, thanks for having me on. That was a pleasure talking to you, and I like that we got to cover more than just tiger nuts and kale and milk, right?
I agree, absolutely. My guest today was Ben Greenfield. To learn more about Ben, his articles, resources, podcast, and more, go to bengreenfieldfitness.com. For links and information on the topics we touched on today, go to westinaprice.org, click on podcast, and go to the show notes for episode 57.
Thanks for listening today. Our website, westinaprice.org, offers free resources to address your questions and support your journey to health. You'll find videos, articles, and brochures covering a broad variety of health topics. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.